Go. Well, welcome. This is our last body-mind centering follow-up from Bonnie's class about transforming stress into calm and chaos and confusion into something else, which is better. stress and calm. I don't have that right in front of me. But I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's her last series in the winter of 2024. So we're finishing up here and happy that we got to do a little extra work. Excuse me? Heidi, what were you saying?
I don't think I said anything.
Oh, well, I heard a noise coming in and I thought it was a voice. But we were talking about different structures in the brain. Last couple of times we've been focusing on the septum pellucidum, which I find a fascinating structure. Does anybody else remember that? She talked about the septum pellucidum.
I've talked about it with you in the last group I participated in, but I don't remember exactly what part structure that is.
Okay, so the septum pellucidum, I'm going to show you one of Bonnie's pictures because that's the only way I can demonstrate this. But the orange structure is in the center here, and it is the beginning of the midline. It sets up the midline, so it's a really important structure. And Fiona, did you get to listen to the last video? Yeah. Yes, you did. So you're familiar with what I'm talking about. Okay, so good. So I would like to remind us of that structure. And if you're free, you can play with that along with me, which is to feel that you have these a double membrane, which is what the septum pellucidum has. And it gives you this basis for the center line, the midline of your body. And as we've done the midline, it's very important to feel that midline. I like to think of it as a sail. To me, it feels like I'm sailing. And also because it sets up such a nice vertical sensation for me. I feel like I'm really long and movable, not rigid, but movable, like a sail in the water. So I want you to take that sensation in your brain, go deeply in. You can put your hand on your forehead if you want and think about the lamina terminalis, which is what Sylvia likes to feel when she has her hand here. But I want you to go a little bit more specifically to the septum pellucidum, which is in front. And let me see if I can find the lamina terminalis. I can point it out to you in green. The lamina terminalis in green is here. And the septum pellucidum, which I want to put in orange, if I can find the orange, which is not immediately available. Let's try. I'll just outline that septum pellucidum. I'm going to put that in a pink outline. So see if you can find it. So here are your markers. Cerebellum is in the back. You have the cortex in the front. You have the pituitary gland here. I'm reading through the paper. You have the mammillary body here. And you will have the pineal here. You see all those structures? Yes, okay, good. And so in front of the pineal And above the thalamus, because here's the thalamus, this is your septum pellucidum. And below it is your lamina terminalis. And so this is the corpus callosum that wraps around the septum pellucidum, and the thalamus, which is posterior and downward from, the thalamus is downward and posterior to the septum pellucidum. And then you have the lamina terminalis, which is the top of the growing neural tube, which becomes the medulla, the pons, sprouts these brain structures. And we get that flexure right here. Pituitary, what's that say? Pituitary gland there, yeah. And so if you go up, if you're going to find your pituitary, which is sort of in the front, you can find your lamina terminalis. Okay, so I'll hold that. I want to demonstrate with you. So again, feel the pituitary right in the front. And the way I can notice that is because I feel like my pituitary is pretty strong. And I know Bonnie once said to me, relax your forehead because you're using too much of your pituitary. So try to open those brows, that wrinkle, those are deep there, open those. And think about the pineal or the back of your brain doing a lot of the processing. And think about your cells leading up the information to your brain rather than your brain working so hard. I find that helpful. And then if you find your pituitary, you're going to go above the pituitary. You'll find the lamina terminalis. You can take the flat of your palm and feel like the lamina terminalis is there. And if you keep going up in your mind's eye, you'll find the septum pellucidum. You can see that, Heidi, you could see that? Could you see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I could see that.
Okay. So let's take a moment to go up the whole development of the spine, of the spinal cord and the brain into the brain, starting from the pineal and the perineal body in the bottom of between your two front and back of your front body and back body. You can say anus and vagina. So in the center there where the pineal body is, you can feel that you're rising, the primitive streak is rising. And it comes midway and then roots downward. As it roots downward, the notochord develops. And the notochord is a central organizing unit of the embryo. And as the notochord has a thickening, the neural tube develops in that thickening and begins to, if you remember, it begins to fold. And we did a movement where from the folds, we opened our arms and knitted our hands together to form the neural crest. And as the neural crest knits together, the somites are forming, and they're forming the knitting together more in the center, in the middle, and it's open at the bottom where your craniophore, your caudal pore is, and it reaches up the top where your cranial pore is. From the cranial pore, you get into the lamina terminalis, and the rest of the brain sprouts like a big cauliflower from there.
So Sarah, when does the lamina terminalis develop in that?
It develops
theory?
after the cranial pore closes. my
Is it the
understanding.
next thing? It's the next thing that happens?
It's the next thing
I
that we
mean-
have. It's the superior end of the neural tube when the neural pore closes. It's the
I see.
border, yeah, it's the border between the end of the ancient forebrain and the beginning of the modern forebrain. The ancient forebrain develops within the space of the neural tube. So remember, she talked about this forms outside of the neural tube. The modern forebrain arises from the lamina terminalis and expands beyond the boundary of the neural tube. It's the lamina terminalis is the front wall of both the third ventricle and the hypothalamus. Okay, and then in the bottom of the neural tube, you have a closure that happens before the lamina terminalis is formed. No, I'm sorry, it's the reverse of that. Bottom closes after the top, the neural pore closes. And the problem with some development is sometimes that doesn't close properly. So. And to the first commissure, which connects both sides, the lamina terminalis has bundles of fibers, and they begin to connect the two cerebral hemispheres to that commissure. It's the anterior commissure, meaning it's in the front. So you're starting to make connections between the left and the right. So it's through the lamina terminalis that the bundles of nerve fibers begin to connect two sides of the hemispheres of the brain. The cerebral hemispheres. And the anterior commissure connects the olfactory areas of the two hemispheres. The second tracks of the commissures are through the fornix, and they're called the hippocampal commissure. And it connects the hippocampus with the mammillary bodies. I don't see a good drawing of that, so I'm looking for that. Anterior commissures. I know she has a drawing of that, so let me go back. I might not have that readily available. So we'll look on Zoom for the commissures of the brain. The anterior or ventral white commissure is a collection of nerve fibers that cross the midline of the spinal cord and transmit information to or from the contralateral side of the brain. It is present throughout the length of the spinal cord and lies behind the anterior median fissure. The anterior commissure connects the olfactory bulbs, the amygdaloid nuclei, and the medial and inferior temporal bones. The posterior commissure fibers connect areas in the occipital lobes, primarily areas concerned with pupillary response and eye movement control. And why is that important? It plays a key role in pain sensation, more specifically, sharp acute pain. It also contains decussating fibers from the olfactory tracts, vital for the sense of smell and chemoreception. Let me see if I can get a picture. Okay, I've got a picture here. I'm going to share the screen so you can see what I'm seeing. I find it very helpful to look at the pictures. Okay. See if I can get this any bigger. Okay. So here we have this anterior commissure connecting the olfactory bulb. And here's the corpus callosum. Here's the columns of the fornix, the left and right. The left and right commissures of the anterior commissure, left and right sides of the anterior commissure, the third ventricle, which is this dark space here, which is filled with fluid, and the optic chiasma here, which has to do with your eyes. Heidi, we're talking about the anterior commissure, which actually registers at sharp pain. It's interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, the third commissure, we did the first commissure with the anterior commissure while you were walking, I think. It connects the olfactory areas of the two hemispheres. It connects the two cerebral hemispheres. And the second tracts that appear are through the fornix. So here we have the fornix. You don't see the tracts per se, but tracts are there. The third commissure is the corpus callosum. Here you can see these nerve bundles that are connecting the left and the right hemispheres. It's the major connection. It begins in the lamina terminalis as a small bundle of fibers and then greatly expands to form a broad C-shaped band. It connects a large portion of the base of the hemispheres. The anterior fibers down here connect the frontal lobes. The middle fibers connect the parietal lobes. It's hard to see which one are the middle fibers, but the parietal lobes are connected. I'm not sure what they mean exactly. Here's the cavity of the septum pellucidum between the two membranes that we mentioned, and that disappears at about 90% of the neonates. That disappears, that cavity. So that's an important space that's there in the early stages of development in the embryo. The middle fibers connect the parietal lobes, and the posterior fibers connect the occipital and temporal lobes. So can't really see that in this drawing. Maybe we can find another drawing. Let's just talk about all the commissures of the brain. So the commissural fibers of the brain are also known as commissural tracts of the brain, are a type of white matter tract that cross the midline, connecting the same cortical area in opposite hemispheres. And we have the main commissure as the corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, the posterior commissure, the habenular commissure, and the hippocampal commissure, which is a commissure of the fornix. We could maybe get to Ken Hub and see what Ken Hub has to say. If you don't mind hearing the voice, so she has kind of a strange voice, but I'll play it. The most recognized and well understood commissural pathways are the corpus callosum. Here we have the corpus callosum, and this is a half of the brain, so you don't see the left and right, because we're looking at front and back. Here's the front, here's the back, and you can't visualize something going. The corpus callosum is kind of like a big mushroom, so it has a left and a right connection of those fibers. The most recognized are the corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, the posterior commissure, the habenular commissure, and the hippocampal commissure. And it ensures, those commissures ensure that there's integration of functions between the left and right structures, and are therefore involved in many functions, including memory and several motor and perceptual functions. So you can read this on your own. The anterior has to do with connecting the olfactory pathway, the frontal cortex, temporal pole, and the parahippocampal gyri. The posterior commissure connects on the language processing centers of both the cerebral hemispheres. That's key. Of course, you want your languaging to be connected. Not only do you think in the words, but you can speak the words. So that's all working together. The habenular connects the nuclei of the two cerebral hemispheres there. And the hippocampus is connected through the hippocampal commissure. An integration of functions between the left and right structures of the brain involved in memory and several motor and perceptual functions. So they do have a video. And I dropped my membership because I really ended up not resonating with the presentations. So maybe we'll just look at this from this coronal plane, which is kind of interesting. Here we see, we're looking through the brain from the back to the front. So here we have the third ventricle, this thin tube. The fourth ventricle would be down here. We have the mammillary body, which is in front of these, which is in front of the ventricle. We have the lateral horn here of the temporal horn of the lateral ventricle. So you remember that it's a spaceship that's inside your head with the left and the right ventricles, and that like the head of a bird reaching out and forward, and the long tail, which becomes the fourth ventricle, dropping down towards your spinal canal. And here's your choroid plexus, which produces the CSF with the ependymal cells. The body of the corpus callosum, which connects the left and the right hemispheres of the cerebrum. Where you have a particular cingulate gyrus here, and I think one on the other side. And here you have the body of the fornix. Okay. Now we're looking at it from a different point of view, from cut through the side. So that would be like a sagittal through, cutting through the sides, front and back, with the front and the back. And right here, they're saying this is the anterior commissure. So we were just locating that. We can go and locate that again in our bodies and our minds. And here's the posterior commissure. We could add that. So let's go to our brains. I'm going to stop the share so I can see you. Hello, it's Heidi. Hi, Heidi. Let's find the pituitary. Going a little bit forward. No, a little bit posterior. You find the lamina terminalis. And be sure about what I'm saying. Back to the drawing. You go a little bit backwards behind the pituitary. And you find the lamina terminalis. If you go up to find the lamina terminalis. So from here, pituitary, and then you go up to the lamina terminalis. And then behind the lamina terminalis, you find a hypothalamus. And if you go back and a little bit up, you'll find the thalamus. And if you go a little bit forward, you'll get to the septum pellucidum. On the anterior commissure, going to connect one side to the other side within the olfactory nerves. So we're going to come back down. I'm going to show Bonnie's drawing so it's easier to find these things. So if you're going up, got the medulla, to the pons, to the midbrain, it's hard to read it upside down. Here are the mammillary bodies. Here's the pituitary in front of that. So here's your diagonal, pituitary to mammillary to pineal. Pineal isn't labeled here, but that's the pineal. Here is your lamina terminalis. And it's sprouting all the other parts of the brain. When it's developing, it comes from the lamina terminalis. Here is the hypothalamus, and that's behind the lamina terminalis. If you go up a little bit more, you get to the septum pellucidum. And here's your anterior commissure. Anterior commissure. Right here. And here's your thalamus. And here's another commissure that connects the left and the right. There's another word for that. Is that understandable?
Yes. I have a question about the structures that we're looking at since it's a sagittal slice through the brain. So we have only one pituitary. Is that true?
It's true.
We don't have one on each side. But the corpus callosum, aren't there two corpus callosum?
Well, my feeling is it's like a mushroom cap that connects.
A mushroom cap.
Yeah, that connects both sides of the hemispheres.
Okay. And the lamina Yeah, the lamina terminalis, it sounds like it had two sides and then they closed in most people.
No, that's the septum pellucidum that it
Oh, the
closes.
septum pellucidum, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the lamina terminalis is a vertical, going up vertically. So you have the vertical here. You have the septum pellucidum above it. And then you have the corpus callosum over it. Oh, we skipped the thalamus above that. And the septum pellucidum above the thalamus. Is this clear? Okay. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put myself as speaker view so that my video is bigger. Here we go. Okay. So if we come up from your spinal cord, we go to the medulla, we go to the pons, which is this big bump. We go to the midbrain here. Here we have the ventricles. So we have the fourth ventricle down here, the third ventricle here, and then the cerebral aqueduct here. Then it branches out, which you don't really see that, but branches out. Well, here's a third ventricle here, rather. And then you have the lateral ventricles, which you don't see here. If you go up higher, you get to the thalamus. If you go forward, you'll get to the lamina terminalis. And if you go above the lamina terminalis, you get to the septum pellucidum, which is our basis for the midline in our bodies in movement. And if you want to find the pituitary, it's right in the front. If you put your finger between your eyebrows and go back, you'll get to the pituitary. And there's only one pituitary here. If you go on the upper diagonal, you see the mammillary bodies. If you keep going, you'll see the pineal. It's not visualized here.
I have another question.
Yeah. Would you like to see where the pituitary sits on the bone?
Sure.
Okay. We can
but my question is about the thalamus. So how much space from side to side does the thalamus take up?
That is a good question. That is a good question. What do you feel? Because it's going to be different depending on the size of your brain.
There must be a percentage, though.
It's best to show it by video. Let's try to get to that in a minute. Let's look at this skull. And we turn it over. And I love the perforations here in the bone. This is the ethmoid plate, so that these molecules of smell and aromas come through here and go to the brain. There's also a place here. There's a point here that is the attachment for, I think, the tentorium, one of the fascial sheaths inside the brain that keeps everything in position. It's an important point there. And then this is where the pituitary sits.
Wow.
So
it's well protected.
Well protected, and it sits inside, they call it the sella turcica, which means Turkish saddle. It's a lovely little groove in there. And here's your foramen magnum. That's a pretty big hole. When you have bigger, Yeah.
That's
During the
literally
soup.
what foramen magnum means. I think it just means
Yeah,
big
big
hole.
hole. Yeah. And here is the attachment site for the ligaments that come up the anterior longitudinal ligament that comes up the front of the spine. It's pretty interesting thing. I wrote about that in my book, about the attachment of the foramen magnum in here. And then you have all kinds of interesting perforations and holes for the nerves to exit through here and here. Very interesting. So yeah. So if you imagine going to the back of your eye sockets, you'll get close to, let's see if I can turn this upside down. You see my finger pumping? My finger here, my finger here. You'll see me getting close to the sella turcica. So you put your finger here, and you're about level with the sella turcica and the pituitary. You have to go in pretty far.
Yeah, go into about here.
But I'm gonna ask you to go, yeah, let me see you go, Heidi. Yeah, I see Fiona's on it. Yeah. Your top hand, Heidi, looks like it's taking away your contact with the pituitary. Yeah, there you go.
I was figuring, you said you weren't talking, well, I don't remember what structure you were talking about now, but you said it's pretty far back there. And I just was noticing on a brief glance, I was trying to gauge where it was compared to the cheekbones.
So it's gonna be above it's above it, yeah. So if you look at the skeleton, you can see the cheekbones here.
Right, but what I was trying to gauge how far back it was, and I was using the cheekbones as a measure.
I got you. So use the bone that's on top of your nose as the measure. And then if you want to gauge the depth, or maybe use one finger. Yeah. And where those two cross, you'll have your sella turcica. I want you to add the mammillary bodies and the pineal, because we already have so much focus on the pituitary, which has a lot to do with the frontal brain in my mind. And I want you to add the back brain, which is related to the pineal and your spiritual self. So you balance out all that frontal activity with receptiveness and self-awareness and acceptance versus judgment. And then from the pituitary, you're going to go up, and above the pituitary, you're going to find the lamina terminalis. So you can use the palm of your hand and find the lamina terminalis. It's going up. It feels like it's going up and a little bit on a slant. Let's see, lamina terminalis here, pituitary here. Just go above that in your mind's eye. Here's the anterior commissure connecting the left and the right halves of the cerebrum of the olfactory nerves too. More of the olfactory nerves. And then if you go above that, you've got the septum pellucidum. Then you've got the corpus callosum. And you've got the cerebrum. And the meninges. The dura, the pia, the arachnoid. And then on top of that, you've got your skull and your scalp. come back to the pituitary, you can come on a slight diagonal up to the hypothalamus and then to the thalamus, your sensory center. It receives a lot of sensory information and it sends messages to the hypothalamus. And your third ventricle forms one of the sides of the hypothalamus and actually cradles part of the thalamus. And then if you go here, I don't know if you were in Bonnie's course before, that you'll have the colliculi. Here's the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. Okay, the superior colliculi have to do with your vision. And so if you see something, you turn your head to it. That's connected to seeing and moving. And the inferior colliculi have to do with hearing and moving. So if somebody makes a loud sound and you jump or you turn, or that's modulated, I think, by the inferior colliculi. And then if you continue to go back, you find the cerebellum. And that's at the base. So let's go to our cerebellum because that feels nice. You can balance with the front and the back. So let's think about the back. And you're going to add the front. You want to pass from the lamina terminalis to going through the structures. And there's more structures that we haven't named that Bonnie hasn't discussed. So just know that we still have the mysteries inside. But I think it's helpful to locate them and to get a feeling for them and understand the connections from the primitive street to the notochord, to the neural tube, to the closure of the neural pore at the top, and then eventually at the bottom. And then to feel the development of the medulla as it passes above the foramen magnum. Medulla goes to the pons. The pons leads to and then above the midbrain, we have the hypothalamus and the thalamus. And a little bit anterior, we have the lamina terminalis. And superior and anterior, just slightly anterior, we have the commissura, the anterior commissura, which connects the olfactory nerves. And if you follow the lamina terminalis again, back up, you'll get to the septum pellucidum above the anterior commissura. You'll get to the septum pellucidum. And there's your midline developing from here. You go above that, you have that mushroom cap, which is a corpus callosum. The thalamus is here, as you see. Now going towards the back, you have the pineal gland back here. You have the superior colliculi, the inferior colliculi, and leading down into the cerebellar region. And inside you have the third ventricle, the cerebral aqueduct. I'm sorry, the third ventricle. No, this is the third ventricle. And this is going into the fourth ventricle. Again, I would ask you to play with the front and the back together and move around the room so that you're not stasis, you're not static in I don't want you to be so overwhelmed in the brain, just to integrate with the rest of your body, to find your movements. And let's look around the room. Think about the back of your brain. And if you want to add the folding, with the heart coming over the brain, the heart preceding the movement of the brain in the midbrain, and then folding it back. And let's move in a horizontal plane. Sorry, I'm getting out of view. And you can feel your feet pushing into the ground as if you were pushing through for tone, postural tone, developing your birthing reflex. Push, push from your feet. Feel the tone, feel your toes. But that balances the brain. You might want to feel like you're skating. Or rollerblading. You can extend the nerves through the periphery. Your fingers, your toes. You can feel the push patterns, pull patterns, the reach. You can play with all kinds of ideas here. The neural tube folds and the grasp around. The somites knitting together, the top 4 somites forming the back of the muscles of the tongue. That brings your head really into vertical. Yay!
Thank you.
Welcome. So that was a lot to cover.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts or anything you want to say?
I could never until today. It's like last couple of weeks. It's like it just felt like there hasn't been enough room. So like above the pituitary, and then to have enough room for the septum pellucida, and it's just like there was something about having seen it again within the pituitary sitting in the
Paracella turcica. In a
and
saddle.
then it's like and then all of like there's just plenty of room.
Fabulous.
I don't know about that, and it's sort of like when I look at those diagrams, it's like I still haven't got there's this relationship. So there was something here that gave that relationship.
The corpus callosum.
No, it was really putting the pituitary in place. I think it was something about putting the pituitary in place and allowed more space above. Somehow I think I felt like I maybe had my pituitary up high, not up higher, but there were just like there didn't seem to be enough room then to put the hypothalamus above, and then to put the termina
lamina terminalis here.
lamina terminalis, and then there's room for the septum pellucidum. But I had room for the corpus callosum and the what's the gyrus above it. So that seemed to be fine. And then it was when I was trying to put something else in. I don't know. Anyway, it feels like I've got lots of space in there now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It feels pretty lovely.
Yeah. I mean, we
quite
made a
haven't
full.
got the pineal gland, but I just love that there's this. It's like you've got the anterior and the posterior commissures.
Yeah.
It's like, giving a front and back to that whole area again, like the pineal and the pituitary. Like there's something beautiful about that. That contain, not the containment, but there's something of that region. I think it's really beautiful.
It is.
Mm.
It is.
Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you for coming today. And is there anything more? I'm just kind of digesting all that too myself to review that. It's always fun. I always learn something, no matter when I'm teaching and where I am. I'm always learning, so it's great too.
Can you put the skull up again sideways so I can have another
Do you want the
look?
whole skull, or do you want
Yeah.
Let's put it together. It's a little hard to hold it together.
Oh, just half's fine. It's just.
Well, here's the whole.
It's I think it's having all the facial bones on the front for me has really helped me because it felt like something, yeah.
So we have the zygomatic process, the zygoma. So we have the ethmoid coming in the base of the nose. So we have the eye bones here, the vomer here. I can remember all of my bones here. That's the eye socket. It's made up of a couple of bones there.
I think it was that thing of having the frontal lobe being able to sit in, like, I'm reaching out to your skull.
Yeah, to sit into it. Yeah.
Just so it's sitting there like it, and it feels like that's going to give me a little bit more, that sense of like this folding, and it comes to rest. Like there's something else that it's offered me about this resting of it in there. Yeah, really. Yeah, it's really. I was trying to, I managed to, I think, just be really light with my exploration, not go, I've got to really get that specifically. So that really helped today of just letting it rest into its place. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Keep in mind that folding happens before we really have the cerebrum. So that folding is at the midbrain level, and it's kind of the ancient forebrain that's coming forward. Oh, and then everything's growing and expanding. So you have that room. But remember, it grows laterally.
Yeah. It's a little not confusion. I haven't got clarity yet of so when I've just gone blank on the name. So that the top of the
cerebrum,
spinal cord,
we have the midbrain,
neural tube, when it comes to closing the lamina terminalis.
Yeah.
Where then is the third ventricle in relation to that? Like, because if it feels like if that's closed, I've got a gap in my development. Then I've suddenly got the ventricles somehow.
Yeah. So here's the third ventricle, and the thalamus here. So it abuts the thalamus or supports the thalamus, and then you have the central aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, which is adjacent to the cerebellum and goes down into the spinal cord.
And
so here's the spinal cord that's growing up.
Yeah, and it's
the midbrain.
From sort of like coming out from the lateral horns of the
ventricles?
the lateral ventricles, and that's sort of how the rest of the brain develops. Like,
No, not exactly.
no.
So when you're thinking about the expanding laterally, it's not the lateral ventricles, it's the whole brain development.
Mm. Yeah, I
So
need to
that
go
word
back
is
on
used
that
in
one.
different ways. Yeah, lateral ventricle means that specific
Yes.
the spaceship.
Yeah, part of the, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The ventricles have developed, and there is a special section on the development of the ventricles. I've looked
Mm.
through it, but I couldn't be accurate about exactly when that happens. But it's in there because it's part of the sea, and that's the beginning of us. We have that ocean inside of us. But this is a continuous exploration. I've been exploring this 30 years, maybe, with Lonnie. So I'm always learning new things. So enjoy your exploration. It's just fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you both.
Yeah,
Lovely to
thank
have you
so much,
here.
Sarah.
I'm so glad you were able to come. And
Yep.
it was wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.